Warning. The following episode contains subject matter and scenes that some viewers may find upsetting, disturbing, or unnerving. Please note viewer discretion is advised at all times. Sit back and enjoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this special alert bulletin broadcast. It is just after 5 p.m. on October 30th, 1990. We begin today's show with some haunting reports coming out of Rostov-on-Don, where, and we warn listeners faint of heart, police have discovered the mutilated and tortured body of 16-year-old boy at Don Liesko's train station. The wounds upon the young boy's body are so drastic, so severe, that this victim has been immediately linked to the ongoing search for the Butcher of Rostov, who has now claimed 51 helpless victims across the country. A wild, vicious and barbaric wave the likes of which our nation has never before seen. The youth has been strangled, stabbed 27 times, and castrated, with the tip of his tongue severed and his left eye removed from its socket. The crazed killer is still on the loose. Russian government officials believe this makes this monster the most horrifying, notorious serial killer this nation, or perhaps even the world, has ever seen. We urgently appeal for young people all across the nation to be alert, to be vigilant, and to be wary of the Butcher.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I Could Murder a Podcast. My name is Ben and I am joined by my good friend Tom.
Hello, Ben.
How are you doing today, sir?
Really good, thanks, Ben. How are you doing today?
Very.
What? I like small talk. This bloody weather, huh? You could blow a gale out there, I suppose. And before we get into it, a little word from our sponsor. We want to take a moment to thank our brand new sponsor, Surfshark.
Little old us with a sponsor, hey? Surfshark is a VPN app and browser extension that gives you access to an unbelievable amount of things.
Now, when me and Ben do research for these episodes, we sometimes encounter websites we can't access because of our location. But Surfshark is here to save the day.
So with Surfshark, you can change your virtual location with just a couple of clicks, allowing you to unblock content.
Now, this isn't all. Picture the scene. You've gone on holiday. You go onto Netflix. Suddenly there's a million true crime documentaries you've never seen before. You haven't even left your hotel room by the end of the holiday. Well, now Surfshark has you covered. You now have access to 15 different Netflix libraries, all from the comfort of your own home.
It also hides your IP address and encrypts your online information in order to safeguard your privacy.
Now Surfshark are sorting you, our lovely audience, out.
If you head over to surfshark.deals/murder using the code MURDER,
you'll get 84% off, plus an extra 4 months completely free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there literally is zero risk.
So why not hit the link in the description below and start surfing the shark? So for those that are just joining us, welcome to Season 2, Episode 3. Or for those that are fans of the linear form, welcome to Episode number 9. Inside number 9, great show.
Yeah. So we film these in batches. Of course,
hands up.
Of course we do. And it was crazy, the timing of the first episode coming out. We filmed the first two in the first weekend, but the first one coming out days after Peter Sutcliffe died.
Yeah, so I mean, I popped over to his ex-wife's house. Not.
Well, you did that whilst he was still alive.
Yeah, well, yeah, not knowing what's
like,
going on. Yeah.
Oh, she'll be upset.
Yeah.
Shoulder to cry on.
Lay a candle.
Do you lay a candle?
No, I wouldn't lay one.
Wreath.
We had the episode edited, ready to go. We were getting ready to launch and reveal the new season coming back and the new episode premiere. And woke up to a notification and 2 text messages that he'd passed away. Mum and Dad. Both let me know straight away. Right.
It is strange doing this podcast because over the time I have had messages from people to articles or just pictures of horrible things thinking, he'll like this.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And it's like, I appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, we've sort of created a reputation for, not leaving any message unreturned. So, keep sending weird things our way, but
Don't ask for weird things. Just send us messages. They can be nice and normal.
yeah, or weird, we'll still reply. Test us, go on. So we started this season over in Yorkshire. Then we made our way to Amstetten, and now we head towards Rostov. And a special shout.
Do the accent. You did Amstetten.
Amstetten,
And then?
Rostov.
That was actually good.
So I was actually just about to do a shout out to Mom Chilo, who has been there since day one. So massive thank you to you for your support. And also, I feel in thanking Mom Chilo, we kind of can cover ourselves for any potential mispronunciations that this case may fall.
100%. This doesn't mean we're linking Mom Chilo to this case whatsoever.
Yeah, I did that with Yayan and Ian Watkins.
Yep.
I've learned from my mistake. So here, Mom Chilo, you have nothing to do with today's case. So welcome, everyone, one and all, welcome to episode 9. Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov.
So Ben, the Butcher of Rostov here also comes with lots of other names. If you want, can you run through them for the audience, please?
The Red Ripper, the Rostov Ripper, and the Forest Strip Killer.
There's also one more. He was known as the Pathetic Monster. That's what he was dubbed by the police.
Well, I heard at one stage in his life, he picked up the nickname The Goose.
Yes, he did.
Unrelated, of course, to Top Gun. That hadn't come out yet.
No.
Meaning a pathetic man. So yeah, that ties in nicely. But I'll be honest, before we do get started with today's case, we've done a lot of dark individuals so far and some deeply disturbed individuals as well. But today's case gives me the creeps.
The heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, Jenkies.
Jinkies.
Yeah, Bellman.
Ooh, Jenkies. It's like the little version of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah. True to form with our kind of style and the way we like to deliver each case, we like to inject a bit of humour now and again, but we also like to go quite clearly deep on the kind of the profile and the characteristics and the motives and the red flags and really paint a picture. But
there's lots of red flags here with it being a Soviet Union. Satire.
The Ian Watkins case was a pretty tricky one to research, but in researching this one, this is the most spooked I've been. That's fair to say. I
think he seems the most like a fictional character.
Yeah, I mean he's got towards the end, pre-trial Chikatilo has got the stereotypical face of an evil, creepy killer.
Yeah,
and
he reminds a little bit of. There's a GIF that will pop up of this baby, but it's a creepy baby. Okay. He looks a bit like that to me. Which you won't get the reference because you haven't seen it. But there's a creepy baby he looks exactly like. That's the only looky-likey I can really do with. I'm going to call him Chica because Chikatilo.
He also looks like Moby for people that are listening.
Yeah,
a slightly warped, keep him in the basement cousin of Moby.
But
Joby.
Moby's a vegan though, and this guy is not a vegan. Oh, can I have a bite of that, please? Faces. So as we always do, we're going to look into his childhood and see if there's any red flags. My joke before, smashed it. Any red flags with his childhood to see if there's any reason why he morphed into such a monster.
So of all the childhoods we've covered so far, this by far is the most eventful, first of all, but secondly, to take some form of positive out of this case, I'm thankful for my childhood now.
Yeah.
This guy went through a lot. His family went through a lot. The whole country went through a lot during this particular era. A world war, famine. It was a lot.
It was an awful lot. It was. But let's go through it and see exactly what happened. Because obviously a lot of people went through this. But not a lot of people are growing up and doing what he does. So
yeah, very true.
Let's see what exactly happened.
So Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on the 16th of October, 1936. So possibly, chronologically, the oldest case we've covered so far.
There you go. So when Chikatilo was born, he was born in Ukraine and they were under rule of Russia, Stalin. And it was a time when Stalin had essentially caused a famine onto Ukraine.
Man-made famine.
Yeah, basically Russia were ordering the Ukraine farmers to send all of their goods over to Russia, and in doing that, it caused a mass famine over in Ukraine.
Yeah, he was essentially creating them to labour based on the fact that they would starve if they didn't.
Yeah,
So,
and millions would die from the famine. And there's even cases of cannibalism when he was growing up. So already that's a very, like you said, it's a growing up in that atmosphere. His mum would tell him, and this has never been proven, but he was told as a young boy his brother was killed and cannibalised. But people thought maybe that's just a threat for her, saying for him to stay indoors, but it's never been confirmed. But he was definitely told that as a kid.
and in one of his later court trials, which we'll definitely get onto, he mentioned that he went into one of his neighbours' huts and saw that they were preparing a stew, and in amongst the broth, he saw fingers floating.
On his journeys to school, he would see bodies on the side of the road and things like that, which is obviously, you can imagine how much of an effect that would have psychologically on him. Obviously, growing up in that atmosphere would have been horrible. His dad was sent off to war in 1941, and he would grow up with his mother. During this time, his baby sister would be born, and it was alleged the timelines didn't add up, and essentially it appears that a German soldier raped his mother, and that's how she was conceived. It's been theorized that perhaps he witnessed the whole thing, which obviously, as a young person growing up, would very much, damage the way you think about things, and especially how you think about women and whatnot, and how sex is done, essentially.
Yeah, and that would tarnish the relationship he had with his sister moving forward. So throughout his time living in the one-bedroomed hut with his mother, he was a chronic bedwetter.
Yep.
And she dealt with this in quite an interesting way, from what I've gathered. She did not take the Big Daddy approach and just place a newspaper over it and...
that'd be horrible, yeah.
Yeah. Instead, she would drag him out in front of the hut and smack him on his willy with a wooden stick.
Oh.
So for a number of key years of Chika's early life, he's obviously missing a father figure, missing a male role model. His father would return from the war. However, he is immediately branded a coward as he was caught and held prisoner of war during the German occupation of Ukraine.
Stalin said at the time, you either die in battle or you triumph. And being taken into a war camp, he is considered he was a coward, and he failed at war. He also returned with TB. So I think once coming back into Chikatilo wasn't very didn't think of his father as very glamorous. Whilst he didn't have a father figure, he'd get very entrenched into reading comic books about war heroes and all the crazy acts. And because he wasn't very manly himself as a boy, he was quite shy,
small.
Yeah, he would always think of like his dad maybe being that kind of big character doing all these things, but him turning up in the way he did, he was very disappointed in what he saw.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reputation of being a coward and being not necessarily being a traitor, but being a disappointment, then became a bit of a stigma associated with the whole family. So he would get bullied for it. And apparently the mother was quite a bully herself. So she would bully the father and the son, calling them both cowards, small, weak. And you can only imagine the repercussions of this. A bit like Kemper's mum. She was never really appearing to be a nice lady.
No, both of them were very maternal growing up. Yeah, but I think it's easy to... I always think these cases, there is obviously things that affect them as growing up, and it will change the way they think of things, but then the acts they go on to do, you never want to give them the kind of easy solution to why they do that.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I also read that he didn't taste bread until he was 12 years old. Leaf sandwiches.
Leaf sandwiches.
Some occasions he would actually eat leaves and mud to survive. Maybe not in sandwich form. That was just me kind of thinking of how I'd do it, but...
Leaves and mud. So growing up, he felt very unmanly and he lacked sexual prowess with girls. People in his class would, chat away and flirt, and he would always be very nervous, even to the point when he couldn't even say his name. So rather than pursue girls, he thought, I was going to throw myself into the Communist Party. And he would put, he's going to go there and lead to greatness, rise to greatness, and everyone will have respect for him growing up, because rather than being that weedy boy that can't talk to girls, he could go do that and people would look up to him.
So he's 15 now, and as you say, really focused on his education and learning as much as possible, and the Communist Party. At this point, as a 15-year-old, he's not had too many interactions with females or too much interest with other girls in his village. His younger sister has a friend over, and he gets in a slight tussle with her, and they actually end up having a bit of a play fight. Now, he overpowers her, obviously 4 years older than her, and suddenly feels a sensation in his trousers that to this point in his life he hadn't felt before. And he actually climaxes while overpowering her, gets very embarrassed and kind of cowboy walks off, back into the hut. So just for the next minute or so, if my mum and dad are listening, then just skip forward about a minute. So on that, he's 15. He's witnessed his mother being raped. Anytime he wets the bed, he's getting his willy smacked with a stick. I don't know why. So obviously everything he's been through so far has left him with a slightly warped view on sexuality. He is now under the impression that if he grapples with someone that's slightly weaker than him or overpowers someone, that is what stimulates him. He's obviously witnessed his mum being, allegedly raped by German soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, all this obviously was for his formative years. He grew up wanting to be, big and powerful, and then obviously that sense of power is something that really, it drove him sexually.
Yeah, and that's the first time it happened, and I guess that would give him the perspective that this is normal, this is how to achieve it. So the feeling that gave Chika would obviously spur him on to much more vicious and dark actions.
So following on from that, Chikatilo did start dating one of Tatiana, his younger sister's friends, but he was unable to perform sexually. He was impotent, and that became a big subject in Chikatilo's head. Gossip was spread, which made him very, very unconfident within himself. We obviously know how he achieved climax before, and he was unable to do it in a more conventional way.
Yeah, 100%. And when you look at him at kind of his later teenage years, early adulthood, he's not a bad-looking guy. He got quite a lot of interest from females, in his area. Often approached, but again, he had in the back of his mind now the stigma attached with the fact that he couldn't, perform. Because this, made him very depressed, very angry.
So she left him after 18 months because he couldn't please her, which I think 18 months is a long time.
Patient girl.
Especially if you're going around slagging him off on his back.
Patient guy.
Into his 20s, he was drafted into the army, and at the after parties and things like that, a lot of soldiers would go back home with lots of different women, and he would never do it because he was so knocked with his confidence. He knew about his impotence, and he was, he wasn't ready to go back with anyone. But he was mocked for being gay by his peers. Eventually, he would start going back with some people, and he was unable to perform once again. He would again be, people would rib him for it or take the mick out of him, and his confidence was once again knocked, underlining the fact that he didn't feel normal, and he wasn't, able to, and he wasn't able to satisfy a woman.
Yeah, and that was a very similar pattern, through his school years as well. It was because he was so, a lot smaller. He wasn't eating, as much as the other children were. The leaves and dirt sandwiches, if we're going to go with that. Didn't quite, children need lots of protein to support their development. He obviously didn't get that, he loved it to compensate this with studying. So would always just go home and read books instead. Try and educate himself and develop himself. He kind of had his own kind of hideaway for most of his early adult life.
So after he returned from the army, he would go on to try and hang himself, and his sister and his mother pulled him out of the noose. He would then go on to graduate at trade school, becoming a Communist Party member, which is the route he wanted to go down. He thought the Communism Party was the thing that was going to make him powerful and stand out.
So as I said, he was compensating in his own development and education. And during his late teenage years, he obtained 2 degrees. But still, that was, not enough for him to feel like a normal person and to feel like, he had his place in society. Again, he would fight depression and lots of ridicule from his colleagues and neighbours and well, I was going to say friends, but he didn't really have too many friends. So it's a really sad circle that he's ended up in, despite trying to, climb away from the poverty that he came from.
So Chikatilo would go on to move to a town just north of Rostov, and his sister would then set him up on a blind date. Well, she invited him out to lunch with her, and she also brought a friend along. And the friend was called Theodosia.
I mean, throughout this research, his sister comes across as a really nice younger sister, despite whatever kind of resentment he might hold against her for, how she was conceived. She's always looking out for him, despite him being bullied. She's always trying to set him up with her various friends. And again, even though she's now, married and has a husband, she's still going out of her way to look out for him.
I think she very much pitied him and knew that he was, he was so unconfident that she had to do something for him. But Theodosia was coming to the end of her prime marriage years, and Chikatilo's sister was also worried about him not finding someone, so she thought that it would make sense.
the photo I saw of her is quite an intriguing one. She looks like she could be a member of the Beatles.
She was able to look past his shyness, and she basically looked at the fact that he wasn't a drunk, he wasn't domestically violent, and in those days that was quite a rare thing apparently. So that was enough to make her happy with the relationship. So they would go on to marry, and it was a marriage of convenience rather than love.
Yeah, and he had respect for her as well, which again I think that there was a lack thereof with most of the male population in Russia at the time. Match made in heaven.
But he was a member of the Communist Party. He was intelligent, well-read, and as I said, he not drunk and whatnot. So I think it ticks a lot of boxes a lot of people weren't ticking. And from the outside of things, they looked like a happy, like well-to-do family. So that's exactly what they wanted to appear like. But they were very much from anything from being your ordinary family, and they had to do things in a very different kind of way.
Now married, they are wanting to consummate the marriage, and unfortunately, they are unable to go down a more traditional delivery of this. So, to bypass that, Chikatilo masturbates onto her stomach and then pushes the sperm into her with his hand.
And this actually surprisingly worked twice, and she fell pregnant twice there. So the weird thing about that is, you essentially, if you were the son or daughter, your parents never actually had sex and you were conceived. Kind of like how Jesus probably felt with the Virgin Mary and Joseph.
There was also, I don't know if this was the same at your school, but there was also
That didn't happen at my school.
There was also the school-based rumour that, maybe it was just my school.
Oh, Jesus.
But when sperm meets the air, it dies.
When sperm meets the air, it dies.
So rather than the traditional route where it's, I think it was probably a school playground.
So Theodosia was able to overlook this, as obviously, this wouldn't be your stereotypical way of doing things, but she was, she wanted to seem normal to everyone else, a wife for 2 kids, the perfect Communist Party family.
Yeah, and make note of her overlooking this, because there'll be a few other things that she overlooks in the coming years.
I've made a note.
Thank you.
He would go on to be a teacher, and for a man who was very shy and didn't like kids, it seems a very odd choice to go down. And growing up, he was bullied and by kids, and that bullying carried on. He was bullied as a teacher with kids because they thought he was very weak. They nicknamed him the Goose, like Ben said, which was a commonly used term in Russia for like a weak human and weak man. So the kids would just talk over him. They'd smoke in his class, blow smoke at him, and he'd get angrier and angrier every day going home. He thought, even these kids don't respect me, so who's going to respect me going forward?
Yeah, and again, another issue with control.
Definitely, yeah. And the sight of kids falling in love, being confident with one another, flirting, he felt as if they were just rubbing it in his face. Mm-hmm. And this is where actually his criminal behaviour would begin.
So in the following years, what began as voyeurism outside the school toilets had gradually escalated into indecent assaults on both male and female students.
Yes, he would barge into change rooms unannounced. He would fondle himself during class, press his body up against students whilst looking at their work. All these kind of things which, I think even at school you joke about teachers being a bit odd.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like these kind of things he was actually doing. One time he kept a student after class for detention, and he held her down and beat her with a ruler. Whilst doing this, he ejaculated and he was stunned by it. He locked her in the room and he left, and she had to escape through the window to get home. So that's another time when it's been rubber stamped in his head. Power is what I need. This is what satisfies me.
So at that time, rumors would start to spread, allegations would escalate, and parents would then begin to complain to the school about his behavior, and this would lead to Chikatilo being let go.
Yes, it would. And he also was swimming in the local river, and he swam up to a young girl, groped her. When she was thrashing around screaming, he again ejaculated when he let her go. He craved control, and when people felt weak to him, that's when he kind of really spurred him on. In that time, there in the Soviet Union, kids were actively encouraged to trust all adults, to even call strangers uncles and aunties, and not to talk out against them. So
times have changed.
Well, it's literally a situation where kids are encouraged to be quiet and not speak out. So it's the perfect breeding ground for someone like him to be.
There was another interesting incident that took place where Chikatilo would actually molest a sleeping boy, and this was observed by 2 of the senior students, who then beat Chikatilo within an inch of his life, and from that point onwards he would carry a knife around in his pocket. So Students, half his age beat him nearly to death for fondling. But again, the police didn't do anything about it once it was reported.
Yes, so after he was moved on from the school, he relocated the family. His wife would forgive him about this. She knew that he wasn't attracted to her anyway, but and she was able to kind of deal with it and, as you said, overlook it.
Yeah.
So they moved to a new place, and he even bought an old shack which the family didn't know about. And that is where he would take back drunks, prostitutes, and young girls, where he'd offer them drink in exchange for sexual favors.
This is the we mentioned there was going to be limited room for gags in this particular case. So the shack itself, he would use the promise of sweets and toys to lure children there. To lure adults there, he would use the promise of booze and drugs. And then if that didn't work, he would say that he had a collection of rare stamps and rare coins behind the shack. So maybe to highlight the exciting things that were happening in Russia at the time, he lured people with rare coins and rare stamps. I've only licked it once. The stamp.
So before we get into the timeline, a little precursor, Chikatilo would go on to murder 50 plus people. So we're not going to go into every single murder, no disrespect to the victims, but there's certain key factors that we're going to pick up on and go in depth on, which really kind of shaped the case. But as I said, no disrespect to the ones we don't mention. It's just there's a lot to get through.
So December 22nd, 1978, Chikatilo claims his first victim, 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova. Her body was found 2 days later in the Grushkova River.
So he spotted her when she was walking home by herself, and he said she could use the shack's toilet, his secret shack, which his family didn't know about. She took up the kind offer and entered. Little did she know what was about to happen. He'd go on to try and rape her, but he couldn't get aroused, and then he took out a knife and stabbed her in the stomach. This is when he became aroused and he continued to butcher the poor girl.
So I believe at the point that he's trying to rape her, she begins to scream and shout, and that's what's prompting him to pull the knife out. He
would go on to do the same things he did to his wife, to ejaculate and push the semen into her, which is, when you're taking away the actual scientific reason he did it with his wife, it's a very peculiar thing that he felt that needed to be part of this,
Again, his perspective is pretty warped, so maybe that's just him. I don't know, actually. That's disgusting, isn't it?
So apparently he thought she had died, but she actually started making noises, and so he had to strangle her until she did eventually pass away. This would go on to quench his thirst for power. He started to think, the way that it's been theorised, he started to think of the knife now as his penis, because he was unable to use his penis, but the knife, we could be able to do what he wanted with it, and it would lead on to him feeling satisfied. So he'd have a blood-stained house after this, and neighbours reportedly heard screams coming from the house, but the police did not link it to him.
Yeah, it couldn't possibly be Chikatilo. He's a member of the party. He's an educated person. He's a good member of society. Instead, they blamed it on someone else, despite all the evidence.
Yeah, they were able to link it to a local man who had already committed sexual crimes before, and they pinned it all on him because, as well, Chikatilo's wife did offer him an alibi. And the guy that was charged would go on to be arrested and then executed.
Yeah, so they actually charged and executed Alexander Kravchenko. He was a local man who had previously served a 10-year sentence for rape. There was no evidence linking it to him, but it was the fact that, he's done it before, he's done it again, So technically, that's another victim of Chikatilo then.
Yeah.
He was killed because of his crimes.
So in March 1981, Chikatilo was unable to get another job as a teacher. He has been moved on from previous roles after being inappropriate with the children. He would go on to find employment as a supply clerk for the local industrial complex. The job would include him travelling around a lot on trains and being away from the family home for long periods of time, and this was the perfect role for what he was looking to do.
Yeah, so this is a massive point in the timeline itself. So this now gives him access to the full country. Russia's, I don't know if you've seen the globe, it's massive.
It's a big place, isn't it?
About half the world-ish. There's some very impoverished areas at the time. He had access to, forests and countrysides where he would pick off vulnerable people. September 3rd, 1981, Chikatilo kills his second known victim, then 17-year-old Larisa. Her body was found the next day. Chikatilo was elated with this, super happy with himself. While his first victim had left him frustrated and confused, the second one had given him satisfaction and stimulated him to climax.
So Larissa would bump into Chikatilo when he was doing his rounds, and he asked her if she would like to relax in the woods, which was a commonly known phrase for fornicate. She went in there willingly, and he made his moves, and she resisted, and this excited him. She then teased him, and he got very angry. He actually didn't bring his knife with him at the time, so he just beat her senseless, and he filled her mouth with dirt to stifle the screams. God. In a moment of madness, he would bite off her nipple. Then he danced around the corpse naked. He had found what had satisfied him.
So that's an escalation.
Yes, it's kind of become, that feels like it's a ritual, and I mean, it's escalated to the fact that now he's biting things off victims, which progresses as we go on. But
imagine stumbling upon that. June 12th, 1982, while on another business trip to the town of, and again, we apologize if this is wrong. I apologize if this is wrong. To the town of Zaplavskia.
That sounded bang on, Ben.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Thank you, man.
I feel bad enough for lying.
I don't... He killed 13-year-old Lyaba Buryuk after following her home from a bus stop. After a failed attempt of rape, he produced a knife and stabbed her repeatedly, including several wounds to her eyes. So I think this is something that slowly becomes a theme. Because of the warm summer conditions, her body was almost a skeleton when it was found 2 weeks later. Yeah, as you mentioned there, the stabbing of the eyes, that actually comes from an old wives' tale. Apparently, if people are murdered, it's imprinted on the eyeballs. Yeah. And it's believed that he did that because he didn't want him to be the last thing she saw. But this would become, essentially, as a calling card, he would do, from this point onwards, that would be a process which he does, which the police would then start linking the bodies with if the eyes were stabbed. Horrible. Yeah. I have a thing with eyes. I don't like, eyes and teeth. Eyes and teeth? Yeah, like when, have you ever seen photos of people with when they Photoshop multiple layers of teeth in people's mouth? Oh yeah, I don't like that. But then eyes, just general, keep things out of my eyes. Don't like it. By the end of 1983, the total victim count had risen to 17, of which 6 had been found. Now, Chikatilo had killed boys, girls, teenagers. I think the youngest was 7 years old at this point. The oldest was 18. So he's targeting kind of the younger individuals, the more helpless individuals here. But he doesn't discriminate in terms of a certain gender. Yeah, and a lot of the victims were mentally disabled and, as you said, very young children. They're very easy for him to lead them away. And as I said, in that time, children were taught to trust adults and believe them. So him leading them away, it was probably very easy for him. The police at the time were kind of theorising that as people harvesting organs, Satanists, or even a local mentally handicapped group of boys, because a lot of the crimes were happening near some homes. I had another kind of theory of the local Russian police. They believed a werewolf was on the loose or on the prowl. Well, I mean, he did to this stage. He carried on with the biting of things. He would even start getting the stage where he would mutilate the body and cut out the uterus. And he said he would nibble on it. And the way he worded it, he said they were so pink and springy. He would bite off nipples, bite off lips, bite off tongues. He would do this when they were still alive, which is absolutely horrific. I mean, you can imagine when you found the body, that thinking that it was an animal that done it, it's probably easier to actually picture that than thinking of a human being doing it. Yeah, and he would only bite, he wouldn't actually swallow, because that would be weird. No, apparently he liked the texture on his teeth, so chewing various organs would give him quite a nice sensation that again would arouse him. Yeah, and the police would label this case the case of fools because they thought it was a group of people. They didn't think one person could possibly do all this by themselves. So yeah, it case of fools. I bet Chikatilo was livid when he saw that headline, having been called a goose for the last 10 years. When am I going to get a break? So due to the rapid rise in the victim count, they had escalated from local police and they'd actually brought in a major, and his name was Major Mikhail Fetisov. Major Fetisov reviewed the situation and sent a scathing report to his superiors, criticizing the ineptitude of local police and suggesting that all of the murders were the work of a single sex-crazed killer. So he's absolutely bang on there. Moscow headquarters reluctantly accepted his findings but fell short of calling the perpetrator a serial killer, as that was viewed as too westernized and not possible in Russian culture. So with this case, obviously there's so many bodies. There's
there's a Soviet method when they would find the body, and this is how they would go about investigating it. They would cordon off the body, which is a normal kind of thing. Then they'd walk in like a large circle and slowly get closer and closer to the body, looking at any evidence. And Chikatilo would dump a lot of the bodies in woodlands surrounded by rubbish. So there'd be lots of things they'd have to look at and investigate as it could possibly be evidence. It's not a case of, a pristine place with, a knife in the corner. It was a case of there's lots of things that possibly could be linked. So there's a lot of man hours spent just kind of searching these things which literally had nothing to do with the case. There was this kind of thing wasn't a commonplace over there. And with the investigation, they actually got a psychiatrist involved, which is very, very rare for them to do that. Because Stalin didn't like psychiatrists. They turned to a psychiatrist called Alexander Bukhanovsky, who actually studied gay and transgender psychiatry in Soviet Russia at the time, which was very progressive, you think, in that kind of era. So he was requested to draw up a psychological profile on the perpetrator, and he made up a 65-page thesis.
Wow.
The main points being, because we're not going to go through the 65 pages, because no one's got time for that. Danny doesn't want to be listening to 65 pages.
Actually, I would.
Okay, page 1. He said sexual perversions were fully developed, so he was older, 45 to 50. He likely has problems with impotence and likely satisfied by the killings. Could have a wife or children. He craves killing like a hungry man craves food. In his opinion, the offender was an ordinary, unremarkable Soviet citizen.
Absolutely spot on.
That is crazy how spot on he's got it. And that's the thing, is like they brought him in, which was very strange for the investigation to do that. It's not a natural thing to do over there, especially Stalin would look down on it. But this guy's come in and he's got it on the money.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm guessing Stalin abides by that kind of non-believer view of the possibility that Russia would have a serial killer just like America. There's Bundy, there's Dahmer, there's Gacy, there's Son of Sam, all going on at a similar time, and there's no possible way it could get to Russia. That weren't bad, my Russian. I was really nervous driving down about my Russian, and now I can sleep okay.
Well, you should have bloody been Russian. What time did you get here? So when doing the investigation previous to the psychiatrist getting involved, they looked into 5,845 criminals, 10,000 mentally ill patients, 416 gay men, 163,000 car owners. They were doing all this extra work. They did go on to solve 1,062 other cases, including 95 murders and 245 rapes. So that even though, obviously, it wasn't leading them to Chikatilo, they did actually go on to solve a lot of other cases during the time.
Okay, so we move on to the year 1984. As most of the bodies had been recovered from woodland areas, the case became unofficially known as the Lesopolosa, or Forest Strip killings. Samples of semen taken from the victims indicated that the killer had a type AB blood, and if any of the suspects matched, they were to be detained for further questioning. Those that didn't match were immediately released.
So the police, the sample of semen was type AB, and it was very common that the blood type would match AB. And everyone, you're not going to catch a criminal and go, mate, can you just go 10 minutes in there and give us a bit of your semen? They can ask for bloods a lot more. So they're going to be doing that in order to try and link them together. So the fascinating thing...
Cool, yeah, can you imagine if they had Chikatilo? He'd be in that room forever.
Oh, it's fun. Well, I guess, yeah. Are you finished? No, I can't go down there. So yeah, so they would be looking for a man who had the blood type AB from that semen sample, which, unbeknownst to them, was a complete red herring. This thing is something I never knew about, and well, the FBI and the KGB didn't know anything about this at the time. That the blood type, there's a tiny percentage of people in the world who have different semen to blood types.
So for someone in that small percentile to be a serial killer, I would say that's potentially the biggest superpower you could give a serial killer. Undetected.
Yeah.
Via DNA.
Yep. That's, yeah.
I mean, there are definitely...
The chances of having a serial killer who would do these heinous things, having that as a blood type and semen type is minute. Mm-hmm. It is tiny, my friend.
Still 1984, in the absence of computers, throwback to your boy George Oldfield from the Yorkshire Ripper case, the details of all the suspects interviewed were handwritten on index cards and kept in boxes. One of the cards recorded that Andrei Chikatilo had been interviewed but was released when his blood type failed to provide a match. And apparently the different investigators that we've heard from in these documentaries building up he was quite arrogant in the fact that he couldn't be caught on DNA or blood groups matching. So he just, no, it wasn't me.
Is that arrogant?
Prove it. You'll never catch me.
You could play a Russian in a Rocky film.
Okay.
It's a good level. So once this was revealed that the blood type and the semen type wasn't, didn't technically need to be the same thing or could possibly be different, they started to change the investigation. And this is when they started to monitor areas which the crimes commonly take place. And one of the common places would be around the railway stations, lots of different people coming and going, people waiting for things, trains, mainly trains, and then they would basically, it would be in the middle of nowhere. So this is where Chikatilo would usually commit his crimes. And so the police were like, we're going to get plainclothes policemen to be stationed at these stations and wait to see if anything happened.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And I mean, the murders now begin to progress at an even more alarming rate and across different parts of the country as well, mainly, as you say, by train lines or woodland areas. But they are now progressing at an alarming rate. And from January to September 1984, 15 new murders had been committed, 11 of them during the summer period alone. So September 14th, 1984, Chikatilo is arrested. And as the police begin to investigate his history slightly more, they uncover some incidents and complaints that had been alleged against him for his penchant for young girls, and young boys. And they uncover several classroom incidents in which had resulted in his employment termination. Several people who also lived in the vicinity of his secret shack had also complained to police that he used to entertain prostitutes in that area, and that he had a habit of stalking the corridors of trains.
Yeah, it all ties in with him commonly committing the crimes around the train stations and whatnot. So whilst he was arrested, obviously the crimes would go down during that period. And once he was released, he was very shaken by actually being arrested, and he didn't commit any murders for 8 months. So the fact that he didn't commit any murders for 8 months afterwards would later on go on to actually affect Chikatilo when he was in court, because this showed that there was a moral compass in him and that he did know what he was doing, and he knew that it was bad and morally corrupt. So this would actually go on to ruin his plea for insanity as well.
Okay, so October 1st, 1985, as Tom said, it's a massive gap in the timeline. During a business trip to Moscow, Chikatilo kills 18-year-old girl named Natalia Pochlivtsova. He would kill another 18-year-old girl in the same area just 26 days later. So December 1985, the police now begin to monitor and patrol 3 different key train lines and train stations as well. So they were documenting and stopping and documenting anyone that looked suspicious, first of all. But in addition to this, army helicopters were used to patrol railway lines and the adjoining forests from the air. So with all this added kind of surveillance on key areas where Chikatilo would target people, this led to him ceasing his activities for almost 2 years. The police force and investigators were later embarrassed to learn that Chikatilo himself, in his capacity as a freelance employer of the Department of Internal Affairs, had actually been assisting the militia to patrol the trains. So you're looking for someone suspicious. I mean, he must have been the most suspicious-looking militia member.
It's like playing Cluedo, and your character is actually in the card in the middle. That's not the card. Packet? What would you say, Dan? Cluedo? Envelope? Cluedo. And also, just quickly, how much... It seems like the police obviously are panicking. They want to solve this, but planes, helicopters flying along the train lines, how expensive has this case become? I know, obviously, they solve a lot of other cases in this time, but it must have cost a pretty penny. A pretty ruble. Ruble?
Yep.
A pretty ruble.
So 1986, as mentioned, Chikatilo did not kill this year. He spent most of 1986 traveling around the country on buying trips for his employer and celebrated his 50th birthday on October 16th. So from 1987 to 1989, Chikatilo would go on to kill an additional 7 people, majority of which were young boys. A particular murder that he committed was in the Ukraine. He killed a 12-year-old boy named Ivan Bilovetsky, and the attack was so brutal that a part of the knife blade broke off and was later found at the scene by police. So we talked earlier, obviously, about the local Rostov police trying to pin it on a werewolf. Well, they actually pinned 23 of Chikatilo's his first 23, which is absolutely staggering to say, on two young boys with Down syndromes who ended up getting arrested and charged for these murders, which is horrible.
Yeah, I think at the time, and there's a lot of ways that they would kind of beat confessions out of people, keep them awake for days and days upon end, which would then, you start getting a bit, what's the word? You get, when you're sleep deprived, you start saying different things and you just want it to end, and you get so desperate, so people, they would admit to the crimes even though they had nothing to do with them.
So for the back end of 1989, including killing someone on my actual birthday, hideous thought.
Making it about you.
So for the rest of 1989, as well as the majority of 1990, Chikatilo would go on to take an additional 13 victims, taking the total count to 53. And it's this point, well, it may have been earlier, but at this point he begins to become quite lazy in his approach.
I think by this stage he's killed that many people without being caught. He was arrogant about the blood type.
Yeah.
He was able to do it, in his own flat, in his shack, outside near people. It was just so easy for him to do. And as I said, when the bodies were left where they were left, wildlife eating the bodies or the heat, it would all ruin the evidence. He felt as if, he was untouchable. So November 6th, 1990 was a very big day in this case. Chikatilo would go on to kill a 22-year-old woman named Svelta Kodostik. She went with him in the woods near Leshkov station and was beaten, stabbed and mutilated. He removed her tongue and both her nipples, and he covered her naked body with leaves and branches. As he was walking back to the station, one of these plainclothes policemen who were just coming back from his break, so he missed the scene happening, but as he returned, he saw Chikatilo walking beside the platform, wiping sweat from his face and blood from his cheek. So he immediately, obviously, was like,
I've got a few questions for you, sir.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing, because I appreciate that this has spanned, a couple of decades now. And it's a big country. He's picked off...
Like you said, Ben, it's bigger...
Half the world.
Russia's bigger than the world.
You're remembering it wrong. Stop getting Ben wrong.
Russia's
bigger than
the world.
Yeah, I'm staying by that. I mean, you mentioned this particular lady walked with him in the woods. Are people not suspicious at this point that there is a serial killer on the loose? Well, we're not buying into the...
When we say she went with him in the woods, we don't know if she was forced there. Maybe he produced the knife. I think by this stage, people probably were being a bit more careful with that. But yeah, it's hard, as I said earlier on, in this kind of community. A lot of the police weren't openly saying there's one guy to watch out for.
Yeah.
They were saying, werewolves and all this other stuff. So if someone, an unassuming man who is part of the Communist Party, wanted to walk for you, you're not going to think, be careful.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very hard to say.
Okay. So November 20th, 1990, while Chikatilo was at work, he had a finger bandaged up, which was as a result of one of his victims biting him. He was aching badly and left work to go to a nearby clinic for x-rays. After receiving treatment for his finger, which was broken, he went home. He then decides he wants to go out and buy some beer. So this is an obscure image that I have in my head, but also there's video footage of him being picked up here. So Chikatilo at this point, broken finger, bandaged up, jar of beer in his left arm, walking around the streets, offering it to children in an attempt to kind of lure them towards him. While doing this, he's observed by plainclothed KGB officers who immediately take note of this strange-looking man wandering around the streets offering a jar of beer to children, and they decide to approach him.
So as he continued on, 3 men in leather jackets would approach him, and they identified themselves as police officers. One of the men would then handcuff him and told him that he was under arrest. He was then transported to the office of Mikhail Festyov at the regional headquarters of the Department of Internal Affairs. Chikatilo, who had made no attempt to resist the arrest, did not speak for the entire trip.
So later that day, Chikatilo is formally arrested. This will be the final time that he's arrested, and upon search of a briefcase that he had with him, as well as this jar of beer, it's revealed that he has a knife, a length of rope, and a jar of Vaseline.
How long is a length of rope? That's what the policeman said. And then Chikatilo didn't laugh because he realised this is evidence. Doesn't even make any sense. So yeah, that reminds me of when Peter Sutcliffe was arrested with his V-neck on his legs. He is literally pants down. This is what I've got. There can't be any more evidence there. Literally, that is,
Yeah, there's no. I'm trying to come up with something that you could have claimed to have been doing instead, but no.
No, I can't think of anything.
Nothing there. So they arrest him and begin to search his apartment. And while doing this, police find 23 knives. That's excessive.
For some reason, I have it in my head, like, again, Sutcliffe had his hammer, that you only really have the one to go to. But 23, yeah. He had a hammer and a pair of shoes that were later found to match the footprint next to one of his victims. So whilst in custody of the police, Chikatilo would go on to demonstrate his techniques, and he seemed to get perverse pleasure from doing so. He would use a gymnasium, and you showed on dummies exactly what he'd do, how he would tie them up, how he'd disarm them, and even how he would make love with them. So he was getting a lot of pleasure from being like, because obviously people have been studying him and looking for him so long. He was kind of, this is all my secrets. This is exactly what I've done. There's footage which will show of him doing it, and it just seems so kind of clinical. It's like it's kind of like that scene in The Office when Dwight's got the dummy and he puts the face on. It's kind of like, it's a weird demonstration of how health and safety, but it's showing how he killed 53 people.
So April 14th, 1992, the first day of Chikatilo's trial. Now, when we looked into picking this case, and to be honest, we haven't really covered why we picked this case. I mean, for us, we had seen this footage and these images, and that's what made us so fascinated with the guy.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be wrong in saying maybe you're different, but obviously with our Instagram, we did lots of images and lots of like headlines about certain people. And whilst looking just in general about serial killers, he popped up quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And then we saw images and the fact, some of the courtroom stuff we're going to go into, it immediately became a real like, what happened here? What kind of case is this? Yeah. And that kind of drew us into wanting to cover the case because it seemed so film-like, I'd say.
So at this point, he's arrested and he's in the courtroom. Now, he's decided that his only way out, and potentially the coward's way out here, is to live the rest of his life in an asylum or a secure hospital and kind of see off his days there. The last thing he wants, like many of the people we've covered so far, is the death penalty. Yeah. So he shaves both of his eyebrows off, shaves his head, and
sharpens his teeth. I don't understand how he got the implements to do. Obviously, the shaving thing, you could probably understand it, but sharpening his teeth. So in the courtroom, he was in his own cage, and at first, I thought, looking at it originally, I think like most people think he's in that to protect them from him, but actually it was very much the other way around. All the victims' families wanted to get at him, and there's footage of the courtroom of them shouting at him and screaming at him, and wishing death upon him. I
mean, it's purpose built as well. There was nothing ever seen like this before. And he looks, even though he's you get the impression that he's trying to convince them he's insane and really pushing for that outcome. You can also see in the way he's moving, the way he's breathing so heavily, that he is terrified.
Well, apparently, when he was in prison cells, he was very quiet, very calm. But when he was actually in the courtroom, he would stand up, randomly scream. He exposed himself to the judge and said, "What can I do with this useless thing?" Pointing at his penis. He was doing these things to kind of demonstrate how insane he was. But the people would go on to think he was just doing a show of it, and they didn't believe him from it. As I said earlier on, one of the big things that made them believe that he wasn't insane was the fact that after being arrested for a short period of time, he did then stop for a bit because he morally knew it was wrong and he felt the danger of being arrested. So all these things worked against him.
So the trials became more like a circus show than an actual trial. It was the first national news case in liberated Russia. Crowds were fighting, as you say, to get to the cage, fainting, screaming, throwing things at him. But they actually had to bring in KGB and members of the Russian army to protect the cage itself.
In a rambling 2-hour statement, Chikatilo described himself as a man robbed of his genitals.
There was no video link trials at this time. There was one note as well that really sent chills down the old spine, and that is that while in death row, he did complete a number of interviews, which we'll put some stills up now. He's got quite an interesting voice as well. But he informed the individual that was interviewing that he had often tasted the blood of his victims, to which he stated that made him feel chills and shake all over. He also confessed to tearing at victims' genitalia, lips, nipples, and tongues with his teeth. In several instances, Chikatilo would cut off or bite off the tongue of his victims as he performed his eviscerations. Either shortly after the point of death or just before the point of death, he would run around the body as he held the tongue aloft in one hand. Although he had admitted to chewing on various body parts of his victims, he did later go on to say that he had swallowed the nipples and tongues of some of his victims.
So as you mentioned, he was going for the insanity plea. He didn't get the insanity plea. He was in fact ordered on 14th of February 1994. Is that
Valentine's Day.
He was taken from his death row cell to a soundproof room in the Novocherkassk prison and executed with a single gunshot behind the right ear.
Now, the thing I like about this, not to just bounce straight off of the gunshot to the back of the head, but Chikatilo was under the impression, being on death row, that once executed, they could extract his brain and find out what's wrong with him. And that was kind of a driving force. There is something wrong with me. And you know, when I'm gone, you can find out what it is and make sure there are no other people like me. However, the gunshot to the head kind of put a stop to that post-mortem.
And that is the case of Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Butcher.
The Red Ripper.
And all the other things they call the pathetic monster.
The goose.
The goose. Not really goose noise. No? There you go. So that was quite a heavy case. Again, we weren't showing any disrespect by kind of going over some of the murders quickly. It was just the sheer number of them. This episode would have gone on for days, and Dan, Boston Sound would not have been happy about that, would you, Dan?
I would take his silence as a maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll do it again. But thank you so much for watching.
Or listening.
Yeah, or listening.
Because there's a few of them. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this week's case. We really appreciate it. Again, it was a slightly, not that the rest of them aren't, but this was a dark, deep dive, and we're glad to see the back of him, back of the head. But as always, thank you all so much for the support and for the good comments. We really, really appreciate it. We've got another biggie coming next week and the week after and the week after. We really appreciate it all.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, where we post daily posts and daily little tidbits on other cases. And also, if you want more content, we've got a Patreon where we do minisodes on, and we also do other little things in there and discussions. So be sure to head over there.
If you want to support us, then we'd really, really appreciate that. We also have our lovely, lovely mugs available. So as we said, send us a message on Insta, send us anything, send us something weird.
You sound desperate. Thank you for watching.
Bye, guys.
Until next time.